Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Before we jump in, I am really excited, surprised and so grateful that this channel needs less than 1,000 subscribers to hit 100,000. When I started this channel, I didn't know if anyone would want to watch my content, so thank you all for choosing to spend this time with me. Thank you for interacting, for commenting, liking, and of course, subscribing. I'm really proud of our community and how supportive and interesting the comments are. I don't think anyone's had an easy few years, but personally, I don't know where I'd be without this channel and this community. So thank you. And I can't wait to celebrate hitting 100,000 with as many of you as possible. Wow, okay. But this video isn't that celebration, and so before I actually start crying, let's take a look at today's topic. A few weeks ago, historical fiction fans witnessed the release of the hotly anticipated trailer for Becoming Elizabeth. The series itself will premiere on the 12th of June, and I think it would be fun to look at what we learned from the trailer and then discuss what we know about this period in Elizabeth's life. How does the trailer compare? What might we expect to see in the series as a whole? Let's find out. Based upon my previous experience of discussing/reviewing content produced by stars, I am wary about showing the full trailer here. So my compromise is that I'm going to link the trailer in my description box. And if you haven't seen it, maybe you want to go and watch it now and then come back for the rest of this video. The trailer is only 2 minutes long. However, I will also describe what we see in the trailer now, and I'm also going to try to include screenshots of the relevant moments that I'm talking about, and hopefully they won't be flagged for copyright. So if there are no screenshots, then it's probably the case that they did get flagged for copyright and I've had to re-edit this video to remove them. All right. So the trailer opens at night. People carrying flaming torches are speeding through the dark on horseback. Elizabeth is woken and is told she must get up. She hurries through corridors and ends up in a room with her siblings. Elizabeth, Mary and Edward rush to embrace each other. They are informed that Henry VIII has died and that Edward is now king. Next, we move to a daytime scene. Mary is warning Elizabeth of the people who would seek to sow discord between the siblings. There are quick cutaways to other characters who might be accused of this. I think I saw both Seymour brothers and potentially John Dudley. We then see Elizabeth passing Mary's warning onto their brother. We see Elizabeth being told that plans are underway to marry her off to Prince Frederick. She is not keen. She does, however, seem to be beguiled by the presence and attentions of Thomas Seymour, despite the remonstrations of Cat Ashley. We see Katherine Parr being caressed by Seymour as she tells him that she has noticed his behaviour with Elizabeth and says that, quote, "Everyone thinks she is a fool for marrying him." Elizabeth begs her brother not to make her marry. We see halberdiers cross their weapons to block her way. We watch as she tells Lady Jane Grey of how little choice she has had and that being a princess only made that worse. There is a battle scene and an execution. Katherine Parr seems to refer to Elizabeth as her, quote, pawn in the game. Elizabeth is shown trying to kiss Thomas Seymour. He pulls away. Elizabeth speaks of the threats to her life. She is shown shooting a crossbow. We then see her confronting her brother in public and questioning whether he is a coward or not. I think we are seeing some sort of court entertainments because there are fireworks, fire eaters, acrobats and a tournament, which cut away to quick-fire lines that connect to Elizabeth. We have, quote, "It is not the lion that hunts, but the lioness." Elizabeth is then reminded that her brother is the king, to which she responds that, quote, "family is no protection," while another scene shows her being asked, quote, "what do you want?" We cut away to Seymour cutting the laces of Elizabeth's dress with a sword. The final line is framed as a response to the last question. Quote, "To return as I once was. That girl is dead." The set and costumes look fabulous. I always like it when you can connect the film still to a historical portrait that the costume is based on, and I can see how that is happening here. The casting looks absolutely great too. I mean, just look who they have found to play Edward VI, because he could have walked out of the portrait itself. From the trailer, it seems that we are going to be made very aware of the heightened threat that came with life at the Tudor court, especially when the nation was in danger of crisis. To me, this series reads as a thriller. However, it does also appear to have the potential that it might dip over into being a bit bodice rippery, maybe? The series is rated 18, which, to my understanding, usually means that it includes sex, violence, and or horror, or a combination, or indeed all of the above. As a side note, I haven't seen any indication that a Henry VIII or an Anne Boleyn have been cast, which might mean that we won't be getting any flashbacks to the earliest events and indeed traumas from Elizabeth's life. As this series isn't going to be released until the 12th of June, this is all that I can tell you about the content of the show, as so far the trailer is the only footage that we have, and it's certainly all that I've seen. However, my assumption is that this series will open with the death of Henry VIII in 1547. According to IMDb, there are 8 episodes in this season, and it's not clear if there's going to be more than one season. Nevertheless, I assume that the intention is going to be that we're going to follow Elizabeth's life up to her own accession as Queen in 1558. Now, I'm sure it's possible that we'd be able to cover 11 years in 8 episodes. But if that's the plan, I do think that some events will have to be skimmed over or indeed totally ignored. But of course, there may well be more than one season in the offing, in which case, how are they planning to break them up? Where are we going to be in the timeline at the end of episode 8? I am definitely looking forward to finding out, but in the meantime, we can talk about the key moments that we might expect to see in the series itself as a whole. Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace in the early hours of the 28th of January 1547. There was, however, a delay in sharing this news with the King's wife and his children, and this delay occurred so that Edward Seymour and his allies could shore up their political positions and power to best oversee the minority rule of King Edward VI. At the appropriate time, Edward Seymour had his nephew taken from Ashridge to Enfield, and this is where Elizabeth was living at the time. Once at Enfield, the siblings were then told, on the 29th of January, that their father had died, and that Edward was now King of England. The new king was just 9 years old. His sister Elizabeth was 13. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it is reported that these two children clung to each other and cried when they heard the news of their father's death. Their elder half-sister, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have been there, because it appears that she was based at court for much of Henry's final marriage to Katherine Parr, and thus, presumably, she would have learned of her father's death while she was there. Mary would remain in Catherine's household until April of 1547, after which point she struck out to head her own household that moved between the estates that she had been granted in her father's will. However, for the few months prior to this move, so just after Henry's death, Mary and Elizabeth were both under Katherine Parr's roof. And their cousin, Lady Jane Grey, had also joined the Dowager Queen's household in the spring of that year, 1547. However, Mary's departure was not the only thing that changed the dynamic of Katherine Parr's household, because in around June of 1547, the Dowager Queen chose to quickly and secretly marry King Edward VI's other maternal uncle, Thomas Seymour. There is a rumour that Thomas had proposed to Elizabeth a few weeks before this, but that she had not accepted. However, it's worth mentioning that there is no documented evidence to support this proposal ever having occurred. Nevertheless, Thomas was soon pushing the boundaries of appropriate interactions between a married man and his wife's young charge, because there were reports of early morning surprise visits to Elizabeth's bedchamber. While there, he would climb into bed with her, smack her buttocks, and tickle her. All of this Katherine Parr may have condoned, seeing it as being all in good fun. Certainly, Katherine was the one who restrained Elizabeth in the garden at Hanworth in Middlesex so that Thomas Seymour could cut the girl's gown into pieces. But then, in May 1548, so less than a year after Katherine Parr had married Thomas, Elizabeth left, or some say was sent away from, Catherine's household. Elizabeth moved to the Denny household at Cheshunt in Hertfordshire for a time, but by the end of that year, Elizabeth was the head of her own household, and she was beginning to amass estates. All of this was funded by the income that was granted to her by her father's will. Elizabeth's principal residence would be Hatfield House. But back to her move of May 1548. At this point, Katherine Parr was pregnant, and it may have been this that precipitated a desire to separate Elizabeth from both her household and husband. Katherine would sadly die on the 5th of September 1548 from complications following the birth of her daughter. Elizabeth would turn 15 2 days later, on September the 7th. Thomas Seymour was around 40 years old when Katherine died, and before long he turned his marital attentions towards Elizabeth. His suit of marriage was approved and even furthered by the woman that was closest to Elizabeth, Cat Ashley or Astley, and it was also apparently being cautiously considered by Elizabeth herself. It is possible that Cat, and to an extent Elizabeth, may have seen this match as a way to silence the rumours that were swirling regarding the relationship between Thomas and Elizabeth. And these rumours had already called Elizabeth's chastity into question. Equally, Thomas's place in society and his blood relationship to her brother the king may well also have made him a suitable, perhaps even a sensible match. Unfortunately, Thomas's relationship with his elder brother Edward, the Lord Protector, left a lot to be desired. And on the 17th of February 1549, Thomas was arrested on suspicion of treason. It was alleged variously that he wished to marry Elizabeth, usurp his brother, kidnap Edward VI, maybe usurp him too, and possibly put Elizabeth on the throne with him, Thomas, as her husband and king. Members of Elizabeth's inner circle, including Cat Astley, were imprisoned in the Tower of London and interrogated. They told what they knew. They spoke of the inappropriate behaviour they had witnessed, the things that had occurred while Elizabeth had lived with Katherine Parr and Thomas Seymour. Elizabeth was also questioned, and it would certainly have been hoped that she would confess to being part of this conspiracy. But she was clever enough to sidestep every trap that they tried to lay before her. Thomas Seymour would not be so fortunate. He was executed on the 20th of March, 1549. Now, I was upfront about my distaste for Thomas Seymour in the video that I made on him, which I will be leaving linked. In that video, I stated, among other things, that I believed that today Seymour would probably be facing charges for the way that he behaved with Elizabeth. Now, this interpretation is one that receives quite a bit of pushback. It is often pointed out that this sort of relationship was not taboo or abusive by the standards of the time, and that people of Elizabeth's age may well find themselves married to people of Thomas's age. And that is certainly the case. However, it was also not unheard of for consummation of marriage to be delayed, in order to allow the individuals in that marriage to reach physical and indeed sexual maturity. For example, Elizabeth's half-brother, Henry Fitzroy's marriage to Mary Howard, was said to have remained unconsummated due to their youth, and this couple were married from the ages of 14 to 17 years old. Similarly, this delay in consummation would also occur in marriages where there were age gaps, if one of the spouses were young. Also, while Katherine Parr was alive, Thomas certainly wasn't in a position to be offering Elizabeth marriage either, because Katherine Parr was his wife, and she would soon be carrying his child. Thomas, at this point, was, to all intents and purposes, also Elizabeth's stepfather. Additionally, I can find nothing that would support a notion that the mental and emotional development of human beings was able to occur at a more rapid rate in the past. Just because there were certain expectations and demands that were placed upon teenagers at that time, expectations and demands that the majority of us would find totally unacceptable today, expectations and demands that it does kind of look like they might have coped with, perhaps, it still doesn't mean that those teenagers were actually developmentally capable of dealing with those demands and expectations. Even if we set aside the psychological trauma that I do believe Elizabeth may have suffered as a result of Thomas's behaviour, his actions would certainly contribute to her being placed under suspicion of treason. So in short, Thomas risked her life. To my mind, this is not a love story. It's not sexy, and I do hope that Becoming Elizabeth will fully explore the nuance of this. But now let's get back to the timeline. In 1549, which was the year of Thomas Seymour's execution, rebellions broke out. The new Book of Common Prayer was the cause of one armed uprising, while economic struggles, coupled with the enclosures of common land, sparked further dissent. As time wore on, Edward Seymour's capacity to govern in his nephew's name would be called into question, and would ultimately result in a coup being planned and executed by his fellow nobles on the council. Edward Seymour was removed from power on the 1st of October 1549 and would eventually be replaced by John Dudley. However, Seymour was allowed to float about for a couple more years, and he was even allowed to sit on the council. But eventually, he would be charged and convicted of treason. And on the 22nd of January 1552, Edward Seymour, who was once known as Protector Somerset, was beheaded on Tower Hill. In the trailer for Becoming Elizabeth, we were also shown that there was a plan to marry Elizabeth to one Prince Frederick. This is a reference to the real attempt to create an Anglo-Danish alliance which had begun to be discussed during the reign of Henry VIII. Indeed, in 1545, Elizabeth's father had suggested that she might marry Adolf of Holstein. But during Edward VI's reign, the candidate changed. Edward Seymour would suggest Prince Frederick, who would go on to become King Frederick II of Denmark and Norway. These negotiations would cease in 1551. But a few years later, Frederick would direct a proposal of marriage towards the then Queen Elizabeth in 1559. In February 1553, so just over a year after Edward Seymour's execution, Elizabeth's brother, King Edward VI, fell ill. Over the next 5 months, the king became weaker and sicker, and as he neared his death, he decided, or was perhaps convinced, to ignore both his sister's places in the line of succession in favour of his cousin, Lady Jane Grey. She had been married to John Dudley's son Guildford on the 21st of May 1553. Both Elizabeth and Mary were increasingly kept at arm's length as their little brother approached his death, which occurred on the 6th of July 1553. Fortunately, Mary had been warned to expect it though, and this gave her time to avoid any plot to capture her, but also to plant herself firmly as a figurehead that could be rallied around. And rally around, people certainly did. Jane had been told she was queen 3 days after Edward's death, so on the 9th of July. And then she was taken to the Tower the day after this, on the 10th of July 1553, so that she might prepare for her coronation. However, her regime would swiftly crumble. And just 9 days later, on the 19th of July, Mary would be proclaimed Queen in London instead. Queen Mary made her triumphant entrance into her city on the 3rd of August 1553 with Elizabeth at her side. Indeed, Mary wanted her sister beside her to share in her triumph, and also so that she could be closely observed. Mary was crowned on the 1st of October 1553, and her queenship began with an attempt to sweep away the Reformation, to return England to allegiance to the Pope and to Rome. Mary set about making a marriage with Philip of Spain so that she could give her nation a Roman Catholic heir from her body to sit on her throne. Mary's first parliament also ruled that her parents had in fact been legally married, which meant, of course, that Elizabeth was the product of a bigamous union. Elizabeth left court for her residence at Ashridge in the December of 1553, but she would not be there for long, because she was ordered to show herself at Whitehall Palace on the 12th of February 1554 in the aftermath of the failure of the Wyatt Rebellion, in which she was suspected. Illness, feigned or otherwise, made this a long and protracted journey, and Elizabeth only arrived 11 days later, on the 23rd of February. Elizabeth was now 20 years old and was arguably facing the most dangerous period of her life. Philip of Spain, perhaps understandably, wasn't keen to marry a Queen of England if her rule was in jeopardy. This is part of the reason why Jane Grey and Guildford Dudley had been executed on the 12th of February in the aftermath of the Wyatt Rebellion. But now, Mary was being advised by the ambassador who had been sent by Philip's father, Simon Renard, and also by Mary's own Bishop of Winchester, Stephen Gardiner, that Elizabeth would have to die too, if Mary wanted to secure her own safety and her rule. On the 17th of March 1554, Elizabeth was informed that she had been commanded to go to the Tower of London. We can get a sense of her terror and desperation in the fact that she tried to buy time. She sat down to write this letter. It has become known as the Tide Letter because the length of time it took her to write it was sufficient for the tide of the Thames to turn, which prevented her from being conveyed to the Tower that day. In this letter, she professes her innocence and begs to be allowed to speak with Mary in person. Elizabeth would receive no response. The next day, the 18th of March 1554, Elizabeth boarded the barge that conveyed her to the Tower of London. It is thought likely that she was lodged in the rooms that had once housed her mother, both before her triumphant coronation in 1553 and then again before her execution in 1536. I imagine that Elizabeth must have considered that every footstep that approached her chamber might be the one that brought the news that she should prepare for her own death. On the 19th of May, which is the anniversary of her mother's death, Elizabeth was moved to house arrest at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire. And I do wonder when, and indeed how, she was told about this move. I've mentioned this previously, but I do wonder if the 19th of May was chosen specifically to heighten Elizabeth's fears, so that when she heard a delegation was coming to her with a decision about what her future might be from the Queen, she could assume that death was imminent, and this, in turn, might compel her to start confessing, so that Mary, her sister, could actually execute her with a clear conscience. No confession would be made, so Elizabeth went to Woodstock for a supervised, but I'd say less perilous year. Mary, for her part, married Philip of Spain at Winchester Cathedral on the 25th of July 1554. And later that year, in November of 1554, Cardinal Reginald Pole was welcomed back to England, and he set about helping Mary take her country back into obedience with Rome. Elizabeth would have to walk a religious tightrope. There was going to need to be outward conformation to the Roman Catholic faith of her sister to avoid a charge of heresy, but she's also going to want to give those of a more Protestant bent hope of brighter days for both them and their faith if she should be able to succeed to the throne of England. But the potential of that succession happening was increasingly looking like it might be a forlorn hope, because just prior to Cardinal Pole's arrival, Mary's doctor had informed her that her dearest hopes and wishes had been realised. The Queen was pregnant. Towards the end of November 1554, she celebrated her state in public with a procession and Te Deum at St Paul's Cathedral. All the signs now pointed to Elizabeth's impending obscurity. In the May of the following year, 1555, Elizabeth was summoned to Hampton Court Palace for the birth of her sister's child. Elizabeth was permitted an audience with her sister the Queen, which took place on the 21st of May. But rather than sit there cupping her swollen belly, crowing over her triumph, Mary was more intent on making Elizabeth confess her sins against her. As we know, no baby would be born to the Queen. As the days turned into weeks and then months, concern gave way to confusion and ultimately to jokes at Mary's expense. Some said she would give birth to a monkey. Others laughed that her round belly would simply prove to be wind. Before long, the Queen's belly deflated, and any talk of her pregnancy and the production of her heir to the throne ceased. Mary's husband Philip increasingly saw his sister-in-law as a way to maintain imperial influence over England should the worst happen. And he would spend the rest of his wife's reign working to keep Elizabeth alive and also in the line of succession. In October 1555, Elizabeth left court and returned to Hatfield and her household, but within months, in early 1556, Elizabeth was at the centre of a plot once again. This time, it was Sir Henry Dudley's conspiracy, which sought to replace Mary with her half-sister Elizabeth. There is a theme going on with these plots. Many historians think that it's very likely that Elizabeth would have been fully informed, perhaps even involved in this plot. But to please her husband, Queen Mary obeyed him and did not have Elizabeth fully investigated for any part that she may have played. However, Cat Astley was taken away from her, to be imprisoned in the Tower of London, and one of Mary's own privy councillors, a man by the name of Sir Thomas Pope, was deposited at Hatfield House to keep watch over Elizabeth. Elizabeth would spend the next 2 years avoiding a number of things, which included her sister's personal wrath, of course, being in any way connected in the public mind with the violence of the Counter-Reformation, and also her brother-in-law's near constant attempts to marry her off to some diplomatically useful groom that might fit his purposes. Mary's marriage to Philip had drawn England into the Habsburg Wars against France, and as a result, in January 1558, England's last remaining French territory, Calais, fell to the French. Perhaps Mary took comfort in the face of this embarrassing loss from her belief that she was finally pregnant. However, any hope in this regard was short-lived, as it once again became apparent that there had never been a pregnancy. Mary's mistaken pregnancies may have been psychological in origin. They might have been what are known as phantom pregnancies. Alternatively, they may have been a symptom of whatever illness would ultimately kill her. In the second half of 1558, it became clear that Mary was probably approaching her death. Nevertheless, she held off from naming Elizabeth as her heir until the 6th of November, which was just 11 days before she actually died, at age 42. On the 17th of November 1558, the 25-year-old Elizabeth received the news that she and her growing band of followers had most ardently been waiting for. She was now Queen of England. So what do you think? Are you planning to watch Becoming Elizabeth? What events are you looking forward to seeing dramatised in this series? And do you think they are planning to fit it all in to one season? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video, or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so do follow me over on some or indeed all of them so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with some friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you think you're subscribed, maybe have a little check now, just to make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not also hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that's going to appear so that YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.